What is up, everybody? Welcome into week 5 of the PFF NFL betting preview. Judah, how you doing, man?
I'm good. You know, we've got a holiday starting tonight for us Jews, and I'm back in my parents' house. I was debating recording from my mother's basement, but instead I settled for the childhood bedroom.
You had to do it for the bit. You had to.
I should have. I really should have.
I'm in Portland, Oregon for a work trip, and I was trying to find a place in this co-working space, and they actually have to my amazement, they have a podcast studio, hence the soundproof foam behind me. So
you're just missing one of those
new locations all around.
Yeah. The fancy mic is all that's missing. But
yeah. No, there's some in here. I'm wasn't sure how to connect everything, so we're going traditional mic.
That makes sense.
We're gonna go normal format. We got some good matchups this week. Hit on 4 of the bigger games and finish up with some same game parlays that weren't in those games. A key insight. We're gonna start off with the London game, the first of the London games, and they gave them a decent one. Generally, these can be hit or miss, but this is a decent one. You've got the Minnesota Vikings coming in against the New York Jets. Minnesota is technically the home team, 2.5-point favorites, 40.5 point total. Can they keep it rolling, man? Can the Sam Darnold train continue against this talented Jets defense?
Yeah, and I think that's almost the question. So I posted this chart. I hope at this point for our listeners, you know what disruption is. But for those new, disruption refers to plays where there's either perfect coverage, i.e. plays where there is no coverage mistake, or there is pressure that disrupts a quarterback from going through his progression. Either one of those things happen. Both can obviously happen on the same play, and that would be charted as disruption. So on plays without disruption, which is a good proxy for things like scheme or like in system, a lot of these terms that you hear pretty frequently when things are going right for the quarterback and he can almost execute the play. Sam Darnold has by far the highest non-disruption EPA. And I think that's it has traditionally been a good measure of some schematic elements. Now, there are 2 things about that. Number one, he's probably not going to be able to sustain the degree of success that he's had on those plays. He's at 0.8 EPA per play. That's 0.3 points better than the next closest guy. That's obviously a massive, massive gap. But even if it's directionally accurate, and I'm willing to believe that the Kevin O'Connell offense, he did this with Nick Mullins, he's doing this even to some extent with Josh Dobbs last year, is going to be one of the better. Darnold and the Vikings might be one of the better teams in that category. But they also have not had a defense of the caliber like the Jets, who are causing disruption at one of the highest rates. And it's less so, I think, a matter of the matchup in particular, but so much of thinking about it as sample sizes, which is if you are in these clean plays, so to speak, the non-disruption plays 70% of the time, and your base rate of success is you're almost adding 0.8 points per play. That's obviously massive if you go from 70% to 60%. And I think that's where the matchup really matters, which is that the Jets can almost force enough disruption such that the Vikings are playing more of these plays where Darnold has to create. And that's an area where he's traditionally struggled. So I have some concerns there. But there's also just a world of possibility where the Vikings are just scheming their way and the matchup doesn't matter as much. And it is driven largely by how good the offense has been. And they're pretty healthy right now on offense. Their tackles are healthy. They've got Jordan Addison back. I mean, we saw when you got a double Justin Jefferson, you're just leaving guys. And even Jalen Naylor has been, our guy Jalen Naylor has been terrific as a third receiver. They have weapons, and they can certainly overcome that defense. I just don't think it's a given, and I want to probably be betting on the Vikings in spots where they really have a lot easier of a matchup than they do this week.
Yeah, honestly, their best matchup on that side of the ball, I think, is the run game. Right? The Jets you saw San Francisco week 1, a team can come in and bully them a little bit on the interior. They have some good players up front, but They've been a little sloppy in run defense in terms of tackling. The highest missed tackle rate on run plays in the NFL this year. Again, it's 4 weeks. It's missed tackle rate. There's some noise in there, but that's something Aaron Jones has done a really good job of so far for the Vikings. He's third among running backs in yards after contact per run, 3.5 yards with at least 50 attempts. So I think you don't really want to test this Jets pass defense. As impressive as Minnesota has been through the past game, as impressive Darnold's been, and their weapons are when they're almost fully healthy without Hawkinson, but getting there. I think the Jets, like you said, have a top 5 pressure rate, and to dumb down the disruption thing a little bit, the Vikings are clean from a clean pocket. They're first in yards per dropback, up over 10 yards. When pressured, that drops to 18th, 3.6 yards. So if you get more of those situations, I think it's going to be one of the tougher tests that they've seen so far this year. And I have a lot of faith in Kevin O'Connell, but I think if you want to attack this defense, you do it with Aaron Jones on the ground.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And the clean pocket stuff is like, I wouldn't call it dumbing down disruption. It's capturing the same phenomenon. And most of the plays are going to be the same. But as we've talked a lot about, there's just a certain fragility, and especially in the context of 2024 offense, in relying on a run game and needing to go march down the field. And look, you can see a game like last Sunday night with the Bills and Ravens where you just get ahead, you hit on some explosive rushes, and like control the clock, and it's effectively over. But there is some fragility to it, and it's not how the Vikings have won in the past couple of weeks. But yeah, I think that's got to be the spot to kind of key in on, and certainly some prop angles there as well.
This other side of the ball is really interesting. You have Brian Flores, the defense du jour of the NFL through the first 4 weeks. Done a great job against some good offenses with San Francisco, with Houston, with Green Bay. Interestingly, all from that Shanahan type tree. This is a very different offense. With it's the Nathaniel Hackett offense, but it's the Aaron Rodgers offense for all intents and purposes. And you've seen there's started some frustration starting to bubble over after that ugly Denver game last week. You saw Garrett Wilson talk about it after the game. He said, "I watch football on Sundays and I see a lot of teams mix it up and stuff like that. I don't think we do that." It's not necessarily something you want to hear from your top wide receiver. He's had a slow start to the year. They haven't really been able to get him going a ton. The run game has been non-existent, especially with Breece Hall in the backfield. Braylon Allen's looked pretty good, but there's not been a lot of lanes created for this offense. 0.3 yards before contact per rush. That's tied for the lowest mark in the NFL through the first 4 weeks. So it's kind of a situation where, yes, the Jets look good in that Thursday night game against the Patriots. But in general, they've struggled. The Vikings defense has been really good. Do you see anything matchup-wise that makes you think that changes this week?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that Garrett Wilson has faced almost the gauntlet of cornerback plays. And I think there's probably, and maybe there's some team I'm forgetting right now, it probably is, but like there might not be a bigger gap between the wide receiver 1 talent to wide receiver 2 than the Jets. And they just have not been able to get Garrett Wilson going. And I mean, I guess they had an easy matchup against the Patriots. I don't think Christian Gonzalez is yet in that kind of elite tier as a guy like Pat Surtain is for the Broncos, or looking back to some of the earlier matchups. But I think that if you get Garrett Wilson going, I think that can kind of capture a lot of the efficiency of this Jets passing offense. And I don't think, I mean, they're not going to shadow, and they're playing a lot of these kind of zone coverages. Minnesota is, but I don't think like at this point in his career, Stephon Gilmore is going to shut down Garrett Wilson. And I think that if you get Garrett Wilson going, that's kind of where you can see the ceiling of the Jets offense. And like Mike Williams can't separate anyway. He's going to be a good player at the catch point. He has seen a lot more snaps recently. He seems to be back at full health. I'm also curious how you see, like, from a very abstract point of view, right? Like what makes Brian Flores' defenses so successful. I think you can correct me if I'm wrong here, is a lot of these disguising of looks and disguising of coverages and pressures. And that's also like the area where Aaron Rodgers has been most successful over the course of his career. It's like a pretty obvious thing for a fan to see, because like Aaron Rodgers is known as, like, aside from the hard counts, like he gets to the line of scrimmage with like 20 seconds left on the play clock and snaps it with 3. It's very obvious to see what he's doing. I'm curious if kind of in this cat and mouse game, there's almost some ability for Rodgers to pick apart the defense. And like the Vikings defense has been very good from a turnovers perspective. And outside of the week 1 game against the Giants where they dominated them, they're allowing like 7 yards per attempt. It's not like they've been a complete shutdown defense, not allowing yardage. So I think there are some paths here. I'm curious what you think of the kind of schematic angle here with Flores going up against Rodgers.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of in line with you. The Flores stuff, it's basically he's just putting constant pressure on the O-line and the quarterback by showing different looks, bringing something else. So even when he, like last year, it was basically he's bringing 6 or he's dropping 8. Like they moved a little bit off of that and added in some different looks. And I think that's part of getting into the second year of the system with him there. And they're better because of it. You saw at the end of last year, teams were able to kind of pick them apart. Good offenses were able to pick them apart a little bit. But with the Jets offense and Rodgers here, generally throughout his career, he's been really good against the blitz. And I think this is a situation where he's going to want to get the ball out quick. And the Vikings they're allowing yards, but they're forcing turnovers. And that's kind of, it seems like that's their philosophy. Like if they can get a few extra possessions, they're going to let you move down the field a little bit. And Aaron Rodgers does not put the ball in harm's way. Like sometimes to the detriment of the offense where he's not taking chances he probably should. But I think it's going to be difficult to fool him the way that you've seen the Vikings fool some of these other quarterbacks. So I do think there's pathways for the Jets looking a little bit better. I think they're going to struggle to run. And you've seen some of these like zone beating wide receivers have some success against the Vikings. Obviously they play a lot of zone like Jaden Reed, Deebo Samuel. I was trying to figure out who that was on the Jets offense. I think probably my favorite is Tyler Conklin at a low line. It's just kind of a quick outlet, but I think there's pathways here for the Jets to win this game. All right. It seems like common sense. It's like the Vikings come in undefeated. They're 2.5-point favorites. The Jets just look terrible against the Broncos. Like, am I missing something? But I do think there's paths for the Jets to win this game.
Yeah. No, and I think that Broncos defense is particularly good, and the narrative would be very different if we played this game last week as opposed to this week, though I don't think much has kind of fundamentally changed. You also brought up the blitz, and obviously Brian Flores loves the blitz. One of the kind of interesting discrepancies in our grading is that Aaron Rodgers ranks 3rd in PFF grade versus the blitz so far this season, but 15th in EPA. I'd like to think those things converge, and perhaps it's related to Aaron Rodgers' time to throw has increased every single week. Started at like 2.3, it's gone to 2.4 and 2.5, 2.7 last week. I'm curious if that was a function of them not getting open or some other stylistic thing, but that's certainly something to monitor. And I think that the angle, especially with the blitz and Rodgers, I think has probably underperformed that in terms of production and yardage relative to how well he's actually played. And I think that's kind of the angle I would play of like the Jets winning and doing it through the pass, where this is not a running game, as you said, that's been successful. And especially if they let kind of Rodgers throw a bunch, he probably needs to rack up a bunch of attempts to get to that yardage. But I think that's certainly possible against a Vikings defense that has been allowing yards. I think you can kind of craft an SGP angle around that.
I always go back to that Chargers game last year where Justin Herbert threw it like 60 times and Keenan Allen had like 20 catches. Like that's the thing that sticks in my head whenever I'm looking at this Vikings defense.
That was a wild one.
So just to summarize, I like Tyler Conklin receiving overs. I like Aaron Jones rushing overs. I think this game stays relatively tight. I'm not going to bet aside, but I like those two props.
Yeah, no, I think this one also stays tight. And I think if the Jets are going to win, it's probably going to be on Rodgers exceeding expectations in the passing game.
Let's move on. One of the Sunday afternoon games, one of the better ones, Bills-Texans. The Bills, they laid an egg on Sunday night. We were pretty high on them. And it was the Baltimore controlling the game through the ground. Talked about that a little bit, and they got ahead, and Derrick Henry could not be tackled, and that was the game. But they come in as 1.5-point favorites against the Texans, pulled out a win against the Jaguars in week 4, but the offense has been kind of disappointing from my perspective compared to what we saw last year. So how are you seeing this one?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going to lead with, of just at a high level, even before getting into this game, just looking at the Texans and where they're at. I think there was rightfully some kind of built-in projection of like CJ Stroud was awesome in year one. You would kind of anticipate him getting better in year two. We do tend to see rookie quarterbacks improve to their sophomore year, especially so for the quarterbacks who are already falling on kind of the right side of the distribution. And like, they added pieces. They added Stephon Diggs. That's pretty meaningful. They got a little healthier on the O-line, and I think there's kind of some anticipation of the Texans taking the next step. But there are a bunch of kind of concerning signs here with the Texans. I think number one, their inability to force coverage mistakes. They're bottom 5 in that category. That is not something I thought would be a problem, considering the offensive play caller and considering the wide receiving talent that they do have. And CJ Stroud's taking a lot of sacks. He I think has improved in his ability to create, but he's very volatile, and he's going to make a bunch of these magical throws. The one that comes to mind is the Sunday night game against the Bears, where he's spinning out and kind of throwing across his body and making throws, and he does that exceptionally well. But with that and the trying to extend plays comes a bunch of these sacks, and I think that's kind of stalling a bunch of these drives. And I think that they're probably a bit overpriced in the market, considering the production that they've had. They do get Tank Dell back this week, I think, which should be a pretty meaningful upgrade. And he hasn't really showed up on the stat sheet yet, but he's dropped a couple of deep passes that I think could have changed the Texans' stat lines pretty drastically. But I agree with your sentiment that the Texans are a bit, I don't want to say fraudulent, but a bit disappointing. And the last thing I'll say before I give it back to you here is, I think last week, and we talked about the possibility of like the Ravens controlling the game on the ground, like game states and game flow and game situations matter a lot, right? And like one particular performance can go a certain way just by virtue of the game state you find yourself in 10 minutes into the game. And that doesn't mean that that's going to translate to the future, right? The fundamentals are still the same, and football teams operate so differently depending on the game situation, that I am certainly not overreacting to the Bill side of things. We did not learn anything new. This was certainly a possible game path. That's why we like to discuss all these different matchup angles, is seeing how like it can go off the script that we envision. That I still think this is the same team, the same dominant team that we were talking about last week.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think the thing I was most surprised of was the Ravens were able to get pass rush. That's something we talked about. Obviously, playing with a lead helps in that department. If you're dropping back to pass a ton, you become more predictable. But was a little bit surprised there. But yeah, for all intents and purposes, this is the same team. And then you got Josh Allen forcing a little bit because they're down. His average depth of target was up over 10 yards when it had been around 7-8 for the first 3 weeks of the season. In this matchup against Houston, I think the angle I am looking at on the Bills offense, it's the same thing we talked about with the Vikings against the Texans, is trying to attack them with explosive plays. And you've seen that. You saw that in the Vikings game. You saw it last week with the Jaguars with Brian Thomas Jr., Christian Kirk. And for Buffalo, I think that's Keon Coleman, right? I think he's kind of the guy who's going to be that option in the offense for them. So I like Coleman this week. He had the drop on the beautiful throw by Allen in the first half. That was probably a pretty significant play there. But then he came back and made some plays. So I think that's kind of the angle I'm looking to attack on that side of the ball. Probably Buffalo will try to run a little bit more too, just because they couldn't against Baltimore. And we talked about Brady kind of wanting to do that, moving off of it a little bit into the season, but it's a good spot to get back to Cook here. And then on the Texans side of the ball, like I was trying to look into what has changed from last year to this year. You hit on some of it. Stroud's definitely getting hit more. He's 27 knockdowns. That's fourth most behind Cleveland, New England, and the Rams. Like that's not the company you want to be keeping there in terms of allowing your quarterback to get hit. The early down passing is worse. Like he went from 8.4 yards per attempt last year, which was second highest in the league on first and second down, to 6.9 this year, 22nd. So you're getting into more of those 3rd and long situations where teams can tee off against an offensive line that's not great. It's got some good pieces, but it's not a great offensive line. And they haven't been able to run the ball. Right? They weren't last year, and everyone was banging the table. Why are you still running the ball? They haven't been able to since week 1, that game against the Colts, where they were able to have a lot of success. But since Mixon's been out, 31st in EPA per run play over the last 3 weeks. So they've really struggled there. You're not as successful passing on early downs. You're getting the more 3rd and longs. Stroud's trying to extend. He's taking sacks like you talked about. And obviously they've still had success. Nico Collins is a monster. Stroud's
Top 3.
Stroud's a very good player. They're still going to be able to move the ball, but they're making it harder on themselves by getting behind the chains.
Yeah, no, I think that's the analysis I keep coming back to as well. And I think you mentioned the explosive play from the Bills side, and the Texans face the highest pass depth or depth of target by almost a full yard, like 10.6 right now. That is certainly the method. And I think on the flip side, the Bills, we talked about this for the past couple of weeks, I think, have systemically limited explosive plays. They have the fewest explosive pass plays allowed of any team this season. That's a trend that goes back years now to the McDermott offenses, and that's how the Texans have succeeded, right? This is not a team that is looking to, as you said, run the ball, kind of march down the field. They're really reliant on those deep plays, which is what Buffalo has been able to kind of mitigate via scheme. So it's a real strength-on-strength matchup. That isn't to say, of course, that the Texans can't win that matchup. And like, this is would it be totally shocking if like CJ Stroud finds the form, Tank Dell catches the deep passes this time, and like Stroud puts up a huge day? Of course not. But in looking at, I think, what is most likely to happen, I see this as a spot which really plays into the Bills' strengths. As a team that like can rely on that explosive pass play game, can run the ball effectively, and those things obviously work synergistically. And then on the defensive side, what the Texans want to do is precisely what the Bills have done a terrific job at defending. And I think that probably lends itself to the Bills. I'm on the Bills here. I like their money line. I think there are some compelling cases on the alts as well, but the Bills money line is my favorite play.
Yeah, I'm not touching anything in terms of side. I think it's pretty close. I do like anything around Keon Coleman explosives, so longest reception, over receiving yards, whatever you want to take there. And then I think I saw Stroud's initial passing yard line was in like the 260s, and I don't think Buffalo's going to get up by enough that he's going to have to be super high volume, and they're really good at limiting explosives. So I like his passing under in that range.
Well, I didn't even see that prop.
Yeah, it's on one of the non-DraftKings FanDuel
I see.
books. Cardinals 49ers is the next one we're heading to. San Fran, 7.5-point favorite. They're starting to get healthier, right? You get Debo back, you get Kittle. So they got everyone except McCaffrey. And coming off a big win against New England, the bar is low there, but a win's a win. And the Cardinals, another disappointing game after the Lions game. You come out, Washington marches down the field, gets whatever they want on offense. They're coming in as 7.5-point underdogs to San Francisco, 49.5-point total. Do you think Arizona can turn it around? Because the first 2 weeks of the season, I'm looking at this offense and I'm like, it's got juice. I like this offense, and the last 2 weeks, it's just fell flat.
Yeah, it's interesting with the Cardinals. I think they have some of the biggest discrepancies on scripted plays versus not, which I think is an interesting little wrinkle to all of this. And I wonder what's behind that. But to answer your question, I think losing Trey McBride last week in particular is really massive to this offense. He is the guy that's winning in the intermediate range. And they want to be using Harrison on kind of the deep routes. And like we saw against the Rams, really kind of exploiting teams deep. That McBride coming back from a concussion this week, I think, is going to help this offense a lot. But yeah, I have some concerns. The offensive line has not been great. And then like within the scheme, Kyler Murray has not done a terrific job. I mean, he had that incredible game week 2, but now it's kind of looking a little bit like more so Rams bad than Cardinals good. Though it remains to be seen. And I still think all the reasons that we like this offense early in the season and the preseason are still true. And like, there's going to be some variance that I think they're going to be fine. And I think McBride helps a lot, but I've maybe cooled a bit on like, oh, this offense has top 3 potential. Though I will say, and getting into this matchup a bit, I'm not sold on the San Francisco defense at all. This, I think, is a unit that has been great for the last like 5 to 6 years, but has not done a good job in virtually any of the categories we usually look at for defensive success. And like, their numbers looked great against the Patriots, but whose numbers don't look great against the Patriots? Certainly
That's
anything
not a
with pressure.
real offense. That is not.
It's not a real offense. It's really not. The offensive line is among the worst we've ever seen. It's almost like built in. We're not discussing it, but I'm really going to ignore pressure numbers against the Patriots because it's so bad, and they have not been able to generate pressure otherwise. And I think that's going to matter against Arizona.
Yeah, it was funny. Nick Bosa like lobbying for sacks in that game. He was getting close, and then he touched the guy when he's down. He's like raising his arm, trying to get the sack, and he finally got the strip sack. But yeah, that's not a real offense. And I'm kind of with you on fading the 49ers as anything above like a middle tier defense. Like, it's the run defense is not great. And the numbers, like the 4-week sample numbers look so much better because of last week. But if you look at like the first 3 weeks, it's close to bottom 5 in terms of VPA allowed per run play. Not able to generate the same pass rush. You lose Javon Hargrave in the middle. He wasn't necessarily playing at a lights out level, but that's still your best interior guy and a good pass rush around the interior that you're losing. So now it's really Nick Bosa and a couple guys trying to step up around him. You've got some changes on the back end. You don't have Dre Greenlaw right now. So I'm kind of in a boat where, yes, it hasn't been great for Arizona the last couple weeks on offense, but I think 7.5 is too many, in my opinion. Like the Cardinals, I think we've seen the first 4 weeks that when they're playing in a positive game script, that's when Kyler has looked good. Like the first 2 weeks of the season, they've got out to a lead, and you talked about the scripted plays, and Kyler's looked good. And the last 2 weeks, they've gone behind, and Kyler ends up forcing a little bit. So I think if they can keep it close early, because I do think San Francisco is going to put up points against this defense. We can get to that in a little bit. I think this can be a back and forth, high scoring game. Maybe reminiscent of that Lions Seahawks game we saw on Monday night.
Yeah. It's also, you brought up the kind of pressure points. I mean, even the Niners played the Rams in week 3. Their quick pressure rates were 18% and 20% in weeks 1 and 2, and then went to 30% against the Rams and 40% against the Patriots. And this is a Cardinals team that's been allowing quick pressure like 10 to 20% of the time. They've done a lot better of a job mitigating that. I'm with you here that I kind of lean Cardinals. The point that concerns me, and this is something I always like to mention, of like the point spread is both a way of kind of measuring fundamental value between teams, but they also represent real points in real games. And like by no stretch is the Cardinals defense good. And like we know that the Niners can front run teams and score a bunch of points on the margin. So I think from like a fundamentals point of view, I would agree that 7 points is maybe a little bit too steep, but just in seeing how this game plays out, I'm not interested in the spread so much as like the Niners can score 40 points. And we saw this last season against the Cardinals. And now as they're especially healthy, we can start to see them kind of front running teams. But with that said, it kind of does shift the median of the distribution, so to speak. And there's probably some value on the Cardinals offense, showing up again like they were week 1 and week 2, getting into this positive game script, being able to sustain that style of offense, hitting on some deep plays. I mean, schematically also, San Francisco does invite a lot of passes on the perimeter and deep, very similar styles to Houston, right? DeMeco Ryans does obviously come from that San Francisco tree. And I see that game script happening also. So I think that's probably my favorite angle. It's not a particularly strong one, just by virtue of like, you see these paths going completely different directions. And I can see kind of San Francisco blowing them out, and I can also see Arizona kind of sneaking ahead with a win. But I think that's kind of the way I'll play it on the Arizona Tails.
Quick thoughts on San Francisco's passing offense this year. Some of the numbers are interesting, like stylistically. What Purdy specifically, time to throw is like 3.3 seconds, highest in the NFL. 11-yard ADOT. 75% of his passing yards have come via the air. That's been around 50% the last couple of years. They've historically been a big yards after the catch team, but they're kind of airing it out and letting Purdy run around and make plays. What are your thoughts on that? If that's something that's just a small sample, if that's like a fundamental change in their offense?
Yeah. I mean, like the two highest time to throws of any quarterback so far this season are Brock Purdy, number 1, week 4, Brock Purdy, number 2, week 3. I think that he has done both a terrific job of extending the play once pressure arrives. Right, that's a stat we track, and he's done I think a better job this season than previous seasons at extending those plays. And yeah, I think it's an offense that, as the rest of the league looks to screen passes a lot, the base rate of screens is up last I checked, it was like 2.5% relative to last season. They're throwing the ball downfield more, and I think Juwan Jennings has established himself as a pretty good player, both at the separation point, but also in those one-on-one contested catch situations. Right, we've seen him make already a couple of these hero type catches, but it's the constant innovation of the Niners, who I think like they got their start almost on like the national scale, so to speak, with those like Raheem Mostert playoff games running for 200 yards and this zone rushing attack. And like they've been a passing team the last couple of years. And I think that's kind of to the genius of Kyle Shanahan, the ability to win in multiple ways, not just from the passing offense and the rushing offense, but also in multiple dimensions of the passing offense. And as you said, I think that's there to change. That's there to say, excuse me, where this is a team that's going to be allowing plays to develop, hitting the deeper areas of the field, and Purdy's not going to be getting rid of the ball as quick as he has in previous years, and kind of designing an offense around crossers and after the catch stuff. But there's going to be a lot more of these deep elements. And I'll just, the last thing I'll say here is I think that's a testament to Purdy and the trust that he is, number 1, going to make the right decision, and number 2, has the ability to extend, which is not something that we really saw much of last year, and certainly not something we saw with Jimmy Garoppolo or Nick Mullins or CJ Beathard, or whoever was quarterbacking the Shanahan system.
Mullins was at one point. That's what I was going to bring up with Purdy's. His creation ability is, in my opinion, the biggest differentiator from the quarterbacks that they've had in the past. And to the Juwan Jennings point, he has, like, I'm always surprised when I'm looking at like situational stuff, red zone, third down in previous seasons. Like he was one of their top third down targets. He didn't have this high volume role, but they trusted him in key situations. And now that's just kind of grown into a larger role seemingly at the expense of Brandon Ayuk, at least through the first 4 weeks of the season. In the run game, like, yes, they're going to move the ball through the air, but Jordan Mason he doesn't have the receiving work, but he's in the Christian McCaffrey role, 78% of snaps, tied second highest of any running back in the NFL through the first 4 weeks. This is a very exploitable Cardinals run defense. We saw it with Washington basically every week except the Rams game where they got into a hole. We've seen teams run all over the Cardinals. And if that's going to be 80% Jordan Mason or whatever it is, 90% Jordan Mason, then he's going to have a big game.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I don't see any props up. I'd be curious that number, but I'm going to guess it's pretty high.
Yeah.
But it does speak to, as we're saying, and as we like everyone's been saying for years, I guess, the Niners can win in so many ways. That doesn't mean there isn't a scenario where the Cardinals can kind of get ahead and stay ahead, but obviously there's a reason that the Niners are the favorites that they are with the offense that they have.
Yeah, I think I'm going to be on Arizona plus 7.5 in hopes that they can revive their offense. Trey McBride comes back. They're not getting into a big hole early, but there's a reason this game has a 49.5 point total. There's going to be some points in this game.
That's right. I'll just recap my
Go for
my
it.
sides here. I was coming in initially really keying on the Arizona side here, and looking at their ability to play from ahead. But I think there's equally a scenario of the Niners winning by 2-3 scores, and playing out that tail scenario as well.
Saints Chiefs Monday night. Let's close it out there. The Chiefs 5.5 point favorites. Is this the most disappointing 4-0 start of all time? It feels like we should feel bad about the Chiefs, but they've won every game, so you can't really feel bad about them. But I still do. 5.5 point favorites, 42.5 point total. What are you thinking here?
Yeah, it's Mahomes magic. I'm gonna start with Mahomes here, and I think that there are some concerning signs. Yeah, kind of as you alluded to. I'm not gonna go out and say we should always work under the expectation of there is something that Mahomes does. He's he's got some absurd record in games where they're down by 10 points and they find a way to win these games, and that is generally an unstable thing. But I think when you have a caliber quarterback like Mahomes, that is probably sticky. With all of that said, break down. So Mahomes let's start with the production side. Okay, if you look at his PFF grade, if you look at his EPA per play, if you look at basically any efficiency metric, it is down from last season, which was down from the previous 4 seasons before. I'm going to mostly be working with data from 2019. That's when we had a bunch of our processes that were introduced in 2019. So we're missing the 2018 season. But looking at things like his time to throw. His time to throw is 2.7 seconds this year, whereas he's been hanging out in the 2.9, and then we had one season at 3 in the past. And if you kind of break down the play from a perspective of scheme versus kind of creation ability, and we use a bunch of these sort of proxies, Mahomes, if you look at where that EPA per play is coming from, where he's worse, it's a lot of these schemed plays. So on his non-disruption EPA, he was 2019, he was 0.59, 2020, 0.48. He's sitting in the 0.4 range, and then this year he's 0.18. Playing from disruption, he's at the exact same EPA per play as he was last year. His creating ability, the same as it's been basically for 5 years. On plays where there is a coverage mistake, again, a measure of ability to stay in scheme, or where the defense is not causing too much resistance, his EPA per play is 0.11, where he's been sitting at 0.4 for basically the entirety of his career. And on plays where there is no coverage mistake, i.e. the situation's not great, he's actually been performing at the second best of his career. I think that matters twofold. Number one, it's certainly an interesting anecdote, especially in understanding that his time to throw has gone down, and it's not on plays where he's extending after pressure arrives. It's on these sort of scheme plays where his time to throw is down. So there has been some fundamental change there, which makes me a little bit more willing to believe that that's sustainable, because they are playing a different style of football by getting rid of the ball a little bit quicker. That's number one. And number two, when you lose a guy like Rashid Rice, who has really been the beneficiary of the bulk of these scheme plays, it matters a lot more than if this were reversed. And your wide receiver talent matters a little bit less when you have a quarterback who can create, because you're right, he can just any NFL wide receiver can be open after 4 or 5 seconds if you're extending the play long enough and engineering your own throws. It's on the scheme stuff where your talent and your matchups matter a little bit more. And I'm concerned for the Chiefs because it does not seem like Kelsey has any separation ability left. He's taken a massive step back. They're obviously without Marquise Brown. I mean, Xavier Worthy's a nice deep threat, but they don't really have that guy who can consistently kind of move the chains and get open. And they're already struggling in this area. They're already struggling in not Mahomes' ability to create, but to everything outside of that. Now, is it a small sample? Of course. Can they return back to the rates we've previously? Obviously. But I do think that is a concerning kind of statistical profile, and one that I'm wondering, and assuming that to be the case, obviously this 5.5 is mispriced, right? Certainly not from a production standpoint. The Saints have been better this year than the Chiefs. But there is good reason to believe that the Chiefs have a very strong prior on offense. I'm just a little bit selling the Chiefs right now.
Yeah, I think I'm right now. I'm a lot of bit selling the Chiefs. Like maybe it gets figured out towards the end of the season in the postseason. It's such a weird situation because Kansas City, you like the assumption is it's Mahomes and Reed. They're going to figure it out. We had the same exact these same conversations last year, and the offense wasn't great through the playoffs, but they did enough. The defense was good, and they figured it out. But then you're looking at the first 4 weeks of the season, what they've been doing on offense. You lose your top two playmakers in Pacheco and Rice. It hasn't been great already. Like you said, Rice is a big part of all that scheme stuff. Screen, he's first in screen receiving yards since the start of last season. These yards after the catch opportunities short over the middle of the field, that's their offense. And like Xavier Worthy's a deep threat and a gadget guy. Travis Kelce is like at this stage of his career, you can't build the offense out of Travis Kelce. It's not a good offense. Justin Watson, Juju Smith-Schuster, Sky Moore, Mecole Hardman. It's like where is anything coming from in this offense outside of like explosive Xavier Worthy plays? No explosiveness in the backfield without Pacheco, with Carson Steele, Kareem Hunt, Samaje Perine. They're not really attacking vertically, even though that's like in theory with Xavier Worthy and Justin Watson as your two best receivers, like that they're vertical threats, but the Chiefs just aren't. Like they're not running vertical passing concepts. So yeah, I think they're going to struggle against a man-heavy Saints defense that has a good secondary.
I think the vertical stuff, which by the way is where like they have had their success on offense, is like the Xavier or their deep touchdowns. Like that was the only success really they had on offense last week against the Chargers, and that same they hit on a big deep ball in week 1 against the Ravens, where they also had a bunch of success. But I think that's captured a lot in the time to throw, which is that they're not allowing these scheme plays to develop longer. They're just getting it out quick, and there really aren't great options, especially when you take out Rice's after the catch ability, and especially considering the downfall of Kelce. That there are some concerns. I'm going to also take this to the Saints side because I also think the Saints, and I've kind of been on this train since week 2 of talking about their ability to mitigate pressure and do all these things. Like I think this is a Saints offense that's for real. I mean, anyone who watched that game, anyone who looks at any adjusted scores or any of that sort of thing would see that the Saints certainly outplayed the Falcons by virtually any metric, and had a couple of defensive. The Falcons had a couple of defensive touchdowns, which I think skewed the results of that game. But this is also a team that, and we talked about this, is very sensitive to pressure, and the Chiefs' defense in particular has not done a great job at generating pressure. I think that's another angle also. For what it's worth, looking at the market is like still pricing this Chiefs defense as elite, when I don't think that is really the case. But they've been below average in causing disruption and in causing these sorts of pressure, and Derek Carr is kind of firmly in that tier, right below Sam Darnold of like when kept clean, effectively like one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL, and I see no reason why the Saints should be off their base rate here in terms of disruption. I think that's kind of the key stat in understanding the Saints, because he's so sensitive to pressure, and also where the Saints are at their best is on those deep passes, which obviously need time to develop, where things like pressure kind of come in. So I don't think it's particularly fearsome matchup. I think the Saints should be able to score. Also, and I'm curious thoughts on that. I'm also curious on like the Chiefs' run defense has been surprisingly okay this year, after like being like basically every year of this Spagnuolo era being one of the worst rush defenses in the NFL. That it almost will like I think filter the teams to pass a little more against the Chiefs than they have in the past, and that I actually think works to their detriment rather than their success. But certainly a lot of kind of interesting pathways for how this game plays out on the Saints side in particular.
Yeah, I think the Saints offense versus Chiefs defense matchup is interesting because I do agree that the Chiefs don't have a lot of great individual pass rushing talent. I do have a lot of faith in Spagnuolo's ability to dial up stuff. He's consistently year after year since he got there. 2019, Chiefs are first in EPA per pass play allowed when they blitz. First in unblocked pressure rate generated off the blitz. So there's going to be scheme stuff that he's going to try to throw at them. And then there's also, like, I can't get out of my head the Jalen Carter game against the Saints, where, like, Vic Fangio did a really good job. The Eagles haven't had a great defense this year, but Fangio did a really good job in that matchup of getting Carter one-on-one against primarily Cesar Ruiz, their right guard, but really their entire interior. And the Saints are banged up on the interior. Like, Eric McCoy's out. Cesar Ruiz missed last week. He might miss again. You've got Landon Young, who's played mostly tackle, like kicking in at right guard. You got Shane Lemieux, who hasn't really played a ton since 2021 at center. Like, the Saints, if they can stay in what they want to do, run heavy, play action heavy, mitigate pass rush, it probably doesn't matter. But, like, they've been really bad when you get them into true pass sets, and they're almost never in true pass sets. But, like, it's not a good offensive line. So it's kind of a question of, do you think Spags can get him into those situations? And with it also game script wise, do you think the Chiefs can get a lead and force them into more of those situations? Which I don't. I have more faith in Spags, but I think in general I like the Saints offense in this matchup. But there are, like, the Chris Jones thing is, like, there's a possibility that that's just what happened with Jalen Carter in week 3, and they can't block him.
100%. I'm glad you mentioned that. I think that's kind of the downside case. And like, there's also a scenario where the Chiefs offense returns to the previous 5 years of form, and then, like, they are on a lot of these true pass sets. I think that's another equally likely scenario. Though when you consider everything and when you think about what is most likely to happen, I do see this as a spot where the Saints can kind of stick to their base rate of success and what has worked for them so far this season, getting rid of the ball quick and then still being able to run the ball effectively and setting up a lot of these kind of play action type passes where they can take their deep shots. A lot of interesting pathways. I guess to recap on my end, I like the Saints here. Basically, I don't like them on the spread. I like them on the money line and on a bunch of these alts and some SGPs.
Just to recap what I'm on for this week, I'm also going to be on Saints money line, Saints alts, and their passing game. So same boat there. I just don't have faith in this Kansas City offense, and I think it's a good spot for New Orleans.
Yeah.
Let's round it out with some SGPs and key insights. I can go first this week. I've only got one, but I like it. It's Burrow, basically a Burrow over passing touchdowns against Baltimore. I think the insight is he's 5th in red zone pass rate, and Baltimore has been bottom 10 in red zone touchdown percentage allowed this year. But it kind of speaks to a larger point that the Bengals are still a very pass heavy team. Baltimore will give up some production in the air. I know they did a good job of limiting Allen and the Bills offense last week, but I think this is a good spot where the Bengals they're desperate. You start out 1-3. This is a division game against Baltimore. I think it's a good spot for Burrow.
Yeah, that's and we talked about that kind of pass funnel nature of the Ravens. A couple SGP spots that I'm on that we did not cover, starting with the Colts and the Jaguars. I think this is almost going to be like a little rinse and repeat style with just like how much man coverage the Jaguars are playing and how they cannot really defend it. And that's going to be looking at Michael Pittman. I'd prefer this with Joe Flacco. Actually, I think we can create 2 different SGPs. If it's Anthony Richardson in here, I think this is an Alec Pierce deep shot type of day. And he leads the team currently in yards per route run against man coverages. But I think if we have Joe Flacco, this is a Michael Pittman spot. And Pittman's been one of the best separators in man coverage, also has one of the highest target shares in man coverage dating back a bunch of years. And there's really no one to guard him on the Jacksonville side of things. They are also a team that invites teams to pass on them. One of the bigger pass funnels in the NFL. And I see this as a real spot for Pittman. I guess you can just bet his regular receiving props. I like that too. But really the alts and the SGPs. And he is the type of player that can also rack up receptions in the process. So building around that angle, I think is one of my favorites.
Flacco couldn't miss against the Steelers. It was like the Steelers kept getting him into like 3rd and 7, 3rd and 10, and it was just like Michael Pittman, Josh Downs. It was automatic. Like they couldn't get off the field.
And I know we were both sweating some Pittsburgh stuff there too.
Yeah.
A little bit tilting there, but that is how it goes. It's really remarkable what Flacco has been able to do last year, and then obviously that small sample size this year. But he was like clearly the better quarterback in this one against what should be a pretty tough Steelers team. But anyway, moving on. I think that the Washington team is in a real smash spot here against the Browns. And the market, I don't think, has yet updated to how good the Washington offense is. That's a separate conversation. But the props I envision, if they're anything like team total, are going to be pricing Daniels at a bit of a discount, kind of like, oh, they're playing the Browns. But this is a Browns defense that has not kind of lived up to those expectations. Daniels has done an incredible job mitigating pressure. He's still taking some sacks, but it's also got the best create rate. Those are throws to an open receiver or scrambles for positive yards when plays are kind of disrupted. And I think that can kind of mitigate any of the Myles Garrett pass rush. Not to mention, this is a team that's making coverage mistakes at one of the highest rates. They have no healthy tackles right now. The Deshaun Watson-led offense has been atrocious. That can just mean many plays for Washington, and many plays for Washington at this rate means many points for Washington. So I like building around some really, really deep alt spreads and Washington up and down the lineup here, really just blowing them out, putting another 40 burger up.
Yeah, touching on Cleveland real quick, watching Deshaun Watson behind that offensive line has been a painful experience. Almost as bad as New England. No, not quite, but almost.
That's there. I mean, also like Watson invites so much of the pressure that it does hurt. But either way, another spot I'm going to be looking towards is the Green Bay passing attack, and more specifically, a lot of their kind of deep shots. This is a team, and Jordan Love has the second highest deep percentage in the NFL. This is something that we saw even dating back to the second half of last season, that they really want to be designing their offense. LA faces the third highest depth of target against, not to mention that they are dead last in explosive pass plays allowed. These are 20 plus yards. The gap between them and number 2 is almost the same as 2 and number 15. They're absolutely dreadful in defending the explosive pass plays. I think we can be seeing a bunch of bombs deep. Christian Wilson's going to be missing this game. I think that leaves some room for Dontavian Wicks, who in basically any game he's been given a lot of the snap share, has earned targets at nearly a 30% clip. He's been absolutely terrific in games where he's getting snaps. He should be getting snaps here. He can really beat you in many ways, but especially on the deep side. And I like building Love and the Packers in general. You can even get a little funky with attempts and completions here, given the high variance nature of Love throws, considering so many of them are going to come deep downfield, along with a lot of these kind of receiving yards, alts. These are kind of some 3 angles I will be on for the SGPs this week.
I like it. Love came in last week in that Favre jersey, and he took it to heart. He was out there just firing away.
He was slinging it.
Oh, yeah,
he was slinging it.
I like it though. I like it.
Awesome. All right. As always, can catch the more SGPs on Saturday night. But this was our podcast.